Chapter 4. For the next 2 weeks, Glenda and Osiris embarked on an extensive training marathon, but rather than using dumbbells and weights or climbing up a treadmill, they went out to the Whiz and purchased the largest TV set they could find, a 50-inch Sony rear projection television, considered one of the biggest and most advanced TVs. "I don't believe we're actually doing this," Glenda said, while turning it on and tuning it to the static channel, as they refer to channel 4 on their VCR. "Oh, you don't mind, eh?" Osiris smiled, gazing at her intensely and flashing an ethereal image of a red rose right out of his stretched arm. "Catch that!" he roared, but by the time the rose came within her grasp, it vanished and dissolved. "So, you want to play?" She giggled back at him. "Catch this!" She pointed her finger at him, releasing a bolt of light that instantaneously solidified into a cartoonish basketball, moving swiftly across the room, only to disappear midway. "Are we having fun yet, Glenny?" he said, thrusting his hand forward, expelling a flash of aura that solidified into a nightingale. The bird chirped loudly, batting its wings and flying towards Glenda as it finally landed on the coffee table and disappeared. The couple was tossing flashes of condensed and solidified aura at each other, testing and practicing their newfound power. They have been exercising in front of their TV set daily for at least an hour, focusing their eyes on the flickering screen static, listening to the hissing sound, and ultimately reaching a convergence point where a singularity of thought and electrified static became one, a blending moment of clarity where thought and energy fused and unified to allow the remolding and reshaping of reality. Indeed, when this moment of perceptibility and distinctness was achieved, it left a subconscious imprint, and further training allowed for additional strengthening of the initial imprint, thus enabling light solidification and matter manipulation at will. Osiris videotaped their meditative sessions and reality-bending practice. On several occasions, they too transformed into a ball of static and swooped right into the TV set, only to reconstitute themselves into their human forms moments later. The entire process was recorded in the clearest frame-by-frame format, an incontrovertible proof discounting any chance of disputing their findings or challenging the validity of their shared experience. Yet, they choose to keep their experimental training secret until such time when a theory could be devised that would explain the fusion between the singularity of thought and energy, and consequently, the apparent enabling of matter manipulation via the human aura. They knew that releasing the documented proof now would cause a worldwide uproar, and that their lives would never be the same again. And besides, scientific research wasn't at the top of their list right now. What mattered most was the conception of their child. Yes, a child born from the fusion of their auras, an idea that they both found so grotesquely idiotic and mythological in nature, but now have learned to accept as an emerging and valid possibility. "Look, Glenny!" Osiris pointed at the TV screen as they were staring at it, fusing their thoughts with the static. "Look!" The static seemed to have cleared away, disappearing gradually, and substituted with a vivid picture of Central Park's Bethesda Terrace. This was no ordinary picture transmitted via cable or satellite, but a lifelike actual imagery of the terrace. There it was, the arcade, flanked by 2 staircases leading to the plaza, as well as the Bethesda fountain, with its Angel of the Waters looking as majestic as ever. Dr. Bearlight was sitting on the fountain edge, admiring and feeding the ducks while waving at Glenda and Osiris, aware of their remote presence. It was unmistakable. It was indeed the Doctor, whose whereabouts they were wondering about out loud. Their TV screen has somehow opened a portal and a direct route to him. They both waved right back at the Doctor and wished him well, June 6, he said. June 6. I think you're ready. You're ready. Before anyone noticed, he morphed into a swan and flew over the angel of the waters and sat on his head. Monday, June 6 arrived faster than Glenda and Osiris could have imagined. They completed their final battery charging routine earlier in the morning and made final preparations before leaving for Dr. Bearlight's office. They were restless and somewhat agitated, yet hopeful that their lifelong dream of having a child would finally be realized. The doctor elaborated extensively on the ceremony, which was about to be unfolded in his office cellar, particularly on the imagery he was about to utilize to increase the energy levels required to create solidification permanency. A day before the ceremony, he walked them through the cellar and explained the steps that would be taken in the child creation process. The cellar was remarkable in its simplicity. It was painted all white and had 2 omega-shaped windows on the west and east walls. The north wall was decorated with a variety of religious symbols: a cross, the Star of David, the Star and Crescent, the Wheel of Dharma. The doctor pointed at a vast round marble altar at the center of the room and said to Glenda, "You will stand here, assuming the star position 12 feet away from the altar." And then he turned to Osiris and said, "You will stand right across from Glenda on the other side of the altar, 12 feet away from it, assuming the star position." He then pointed above at the sphere crystal sun pendant hanging from the ceiling, stating, "I'll fuse my aura with the light above and energize the 6 statues circling the altar." "Why statues?" they both asked in unison. "My apologies," he said, disembarking his aura, which solidified into 6 separate marble statues of fertility gods and goddesses. There they were, Astarte, the Phoenician fertility goddess and the deity of the planet Venus; Herishaf, an ancient Egyptian ram god, creator, and fertility god who was born from the primordial waters; Freya, the Norse goddess of fertility, along with Freyr, the Norse god of fertility, virility, and prosperity; Aditi, the Hindi goddess of space, consciousness, the past, the future, and fertility; and finally Ishtar, the Akkadian, Assyrian, and Babylonian goddess of fertility and love. The statues were positioned in an outer circle surrounding the altar, their appearance lofty and majestic. Glenda walked towards the imagery of Aditi and exclaimed in astonishment as the goddess's eyes seemed to follow her, "It's so lifelike! They're all so meticulously detailed. It's as if they were made out of wax, not solid marble." "Yes, quite right," the doctor mumbled. "The statues will serve as thought-form magnifiers and energizers. Each and every image imbues and exudes fertility, birth, and the power of creation itself. Their combined cultural energy essence will ensure permanent solidification of the child and ultimate transformation to flesh and blood. Unlike our current ability of manipulating reality for a short period, this specific process will bring forth life as we know it. Though the baby is conceived in thought and solidifies through the fusion of your combined auras, the final materialization in this realm of existence is achieved by a powerful energy surge pointed at the altar through the deities surrounding it." "And how will the deities direct their energy toward the altar?" Glenda inquired somewhat impatiently. "Well, I guess you'll just have to wait and see, won't you, my dear Glenda?" He smiled as he climbed the stairs leading to his office. The couple stood outside their apartment door looking at each other. "We are really doing this, aren't we?" Osiris said as he was locking the door. "It's surreal, Ozzy," Glenda replied. "I'm afraid we're going to wake up from this fantastic dream any second now," she said while reaching for her handbag. "Wait, Glennie, is that a tear I see? Why are you crying? Calm down," he whispered as he held her tight in his arms and pressed his lips against hers. "This is what we wanted, Glenn. Well, Not exactly. But this is as close as we're going to get to having our own baby. Apart from adopting one, we have been looking forward to this moment, love. And this yearning is about to literally materialize. We are having a baby, Glennie. A baby. He smiled and dried up her tears. They took a cab and remained silent for the duration of the ride to Dr. Bearlight's Park Avenue office. They were both confined in their thoughts, eyes wide open, looking dazed and disorientated as though they were under the influence of psychedelic drugs. Glenda held Osiris's hand tightly, breathing slowly and steadily, relaxing and pacifying her troubled mind. The cab finally stopped at the office of Dr. Bearlight, who was outside waiting for them. He greeted them enthusiastically and walked them into his residence, situated on top of his office. "Would you like some tea?" he asked. "No, doctor, thank you. I think we're ready," Osiris replied. "Absolutely. Quite right," the doctor responded, handing them 2 white silk Roman-looking tunics. "Put these on." The tunics were amazingly soft to the touch, adorned with gold trimmings around the sleeves and along the sides. The center had a gold infinity symbol drawn horizontally that appeared to be pulsating and moving. They were somewhat longer than usual and touched their knees. "We're not going to disappear once we put these on," Glenda said semi-seriously. "What a funny thing to say," Dr. Bearlight giggled. "Of course not." They put the tunics on and proceeded to the cellar, their hearts beating ever faster. The cellar was brightly lit, and Dr. Bearlight, wearing a similar tunic as Glenda and Osiris, hovered softly and landed on the marbled altar. The couple assumed their positions across each other, as they were instructed earlier, both glancing at the omega-shaped windows, which were shining mightily over and across the ceiling. Standing firmly, the doctor looked at the couple and said in a soft but clear voice, "My friends, I want to express my gratitude for your trust and friendship, and for allowing me into your lives. Osiris, we have known each other for many years now. Your passion and diligence for science will transform this planet and put it on an evolutionary new course. You are the founding father of a wondrous transformative era, a participant in the bold unveiling of human potentiality. Your resourcefulness was a catalyst in my own journey for enlightenment. Indeed, I am forever in your debt, my dear Osiris. Let your persistence guide you in the path of human self-discovery and godhood." He stopped momentarily and turned toward Glenda. "My dear Glenda, I gave you a bit of a scare, didn't I?" he said, smiling broadly. "I shook your perception of existence and landed you in a world that appears in stark contrast to nanotechnology and mathematical equations. But it is all connected, my dear. Reality is a lot more simplified than the complexity your colleagues think it must be. Your child is about to be born in the most unfathomable way, a product of your mutual love, born of thought, and solidified through the light that streams majestically in your bodies. Rejoice, dear and beloved woman, your child is at hand." And, as Dr. Bearlight completed his sentence, his body morphed into a tiny point of flashing sparkle that then burst and exploded like a mini Big Bang with thunderous ferocity, illuminating the cellar with a blinding light as it was being rapidly absorbed by the sphere crystal sun pendant hanging from above. The pendant was shining brightly, glowing and pulsating intensively, filling the entire room with its ethereal magnificence, exuding a sense of serenity and tranquility. "Now!" they heard Dr. Bearlight's voice shout. "Now!" Glenda and Osiris assumed the star position as their infinity symbols in their tunics began to beam and move with ever-increasing speed. Their auras leaped through the infinity symbols and floated toward the altar in the original human form. Both auras landed on the altar, facing each other in their star position. Suddenly, 6 beams of condensed and concentrated light shot through the crystal pendant and touched the 6 divine statues circling the altar. The statues came to life immediately, looking illustrious in their dazzling and delightful beauty. Each god and goddess stretched their arms forward, their palms raised and directed toward the altar. Blasts of brilliant, focused light came out of their palms and hit the altar from all 6 directions. It appeared as though the altar were turning into a cauldron of ethereal fire, while Osiris and Glenda's auras were fusing. The altar, however, did not lose its structural form, in spite of the immense energy burst it absorbed. The couple's auras were hovering the altar as their energy increased in ferocity, circling around themselves in stunning speed and changing colors while merging and interfacing with each other. 1 second, the combined auras were glowing orange, and the next, blue, and then suddenly green. The colors were changing erratically as the merged energies continued their circling dance with ever-increasing velocity, floating steadily on top of the altar. The fusion of auras was finally transfigured into an infinity symbol, spinning around itself, protected by a flashing shield surrounding the vertical space between the hanging crystal pendant and the altar. It continued to spin around itself for exactly 6 more minutes, until it finally assumed the likeness of a small, miniaturized sphere measuring 20 inches in diameter. The sphere was convulsing vigorously, changing into a variety of geometric patterns and other inanimate objects, until it disappeared, as Glenda and Osiris watched in utter disbelief. The two were exchanging looks of befuddlement, as if something had gone awry. The sphere suddenly reappeared, all translucent and glassy, brewing with an unrecognizable matter that gradually took the form of a humanoid fetus in front of their very eyes. A 9-month process has unfolded in literally minutes as the fetus was stretching, twisting and tumbling, ready to push through as though encased in a womb. The fetus, facing downward, burst out of the sphere and hovered the altar while absorbing the altar's gushing inferno and the light streaming from the crystal pendant in the ceiling. As the baby appeared to consume the entirety of the remaining energy, the pendant suddenly exploded into thousands of pieces, remaining suspended in mid-air in what appeared to be an outline of a galaxy, with an enormous, lustrous star at its center. And while the infant baby landed softly inside of a bassinet on the altar, all the pendant's broken fragments, along with the sphere and statues, disappeared into thin air, leaving the omega-shaped windows as the only source of light in the room. Glenda and Osiris rushed toward the altar and took a first look at their child. "It's a boy!" Osiris exclaimed. "Aurael," Glenda whispered. "My little Auraman." She burst into tears. She held the baby in her arms and hugged him passionately. Osiris gazed at his newborn son as he was screaming out loud, "Thank you, Dr. Bearlight, thank you!" But Dr. Bearlight was nowhere to be found. Chapter 5. "Dr. Bearlight! Dr. Bearlight!" Osiris kept calling the doctor's name, hoping he'd materialize as he always did, but alas, the doctor simply vanished without a trace. "What do you suppose happened?" Glenda asked, looking all worried. "Your guess is as good as mine," he replied, looking intensively at the ceiling above, where they last saw him. "What do you think it was?" "What do you mean? What do I think what was?" "The shards, Glenda. The thousands of crystalline pieces suspended in mid-air, in an outline of a galaxy, with a bright star in the middle." "I don't know. I'd rather ask Dr. Bearlight as soon as we find him. Maybe he materialized upstairs," she said somewhat impatiently. "Maybe, possibly," Osiris replied as he was climbing up the stairs and exiting the cellar while Glenda followed, holding their baby, who slept peacefully in his little bassinet. Glenda took a long look at Aurael and noticed that he was still glowing and shimmering. An energy-type blanket seemed to have resonated from the child's body. It grew weaker and lighter in strength as the baby kept breathing. With each breath, the light grew dimmer, until it finally disappeared, exposing Uriel's slightly darker natural skin color. "He's so beautiful," Glenda sighed as she was tearing up again, finding it hard to control her emotions. "Are we actually naming him Uriel, Glennie?" "Yes, Uriel. Light of God. My light. Our light," she responded in an absolute, determined voice. A unique name for a unique child. But how do we explain it to others? It's not like we are about to share the details of this very unheard of birth with anyone. Osiris questioned her while admiring his son. "Well, of course not, silly. The word aura means light, from the Hebrew word or. It is basically the male version of the name Aurora," she answered, ignoring his original question. "Wow. You are absolutely right, Glenda. It didn't even cross my mind. Look!" She cut him off mid-sentence. "Look at our little aura man. He's so enchanting, almost hypnotic. He's everything we could have hoped for and probably more." "It's the probably more that frightens me somewhat," he said. "You don't assume he has our abilities, do you?" She questioned him rather warily. "I do indeed. They are probably magnified by 1,000-fold, he noted with absolute certainty. "Come to think of it, I wonder if Dr. Bearlight didn't have some sort of ulterior motive that extended far beyond fertility treatment and the eventual birth of a normal child. Otherwise, why would he infuse him with such an unimaginable amount of energy when much lesser was needed to complete the solidification process? Only the future might tell what our son is capable of, with all that startling power circulating in his veins. Manipulating reality must be in his nature. We must contain it, however, at least until he has grown up." "I suspected as much as well," Glenda concurred. "Be that as it may, I am looking forward to an uneventful, normal childhood. No hocus-pocus. Can you imagine what would happen if we choose to reveal to the world how he was born and the type of ability or abilities he might possess? He'll be taken away from us in no time and dissected like a lab rat. We must keep it a secret, and when the time comes, we will inform him of his unusual birth and likely powers. It'll be up to him to decide what to do with that information, and whether to share it with the rest of the world or not." "What is he really?" Osiris asked Glenda, almost whispering as he paused momentarily and then continued. "Considering the way he was born, I suspect that he is not just our bundle of joy, but most probably a new beginning in humanity's evolutionary process, a way for all of us to explore and unravel the extent of mankind's potentiality. I am not quite sure what that means yet, but I have no doubt we will find out." "How do we explain his arrival, though? We can't just say we wished him into existence or that we conjured him up," Osiris bemoaned while looking for Dr. Bearlight upstairs in his private residence. "Well, we can say that," Glenda started saying, as they both noticed Dr. Bearlight floating by the solid, heavy-set oak grandfather clock standing against the southern living room wall. "Dr. Bearlight, thank God you are all right," Glenda exclaimed happily. "We thought we'd lost you." "Yeah, you gave us quite a scare," Osiris added. But Dr. Bearlight's image continued to float and stare at the couple, as though it did not recognize them. His reflection lacked substance, and was devoid of its usual stamina and vigor. It resembled a lifeless 3D hologram, rather than the doctor's usual viviserious self. The image flickered a bit, and finally turned toward them, and said in a tone of voice that sounded echo-like, "Congratulations, my friends, on the birth of your son. Alas, I did not survive the energy transference. A part of my essence will forever be united with your child. Indeed, I have anticipated as much, and implanted time-reference memories in the minds of all your friends and acquaintances, who believe that it has already been a year since you embarked on my fertility treatment, a procedure that was proved to be a success. culminating in the natural birth of your baby just a few days ago. The imprint of those memories extends further into the entire staff at Mount Sinai Hospital, who have supposedly delivered the child. Glenda attempted to interrupt the doctor's flow of words with a question, but it seemed as though the image was on auto mode and was oblivious to any efforts of direct conversation. All is as it should be, the doctor continued. Your son's birth is perceived by all as completely natural, and my absence is because of sudden and abrupt death. The doctor's voice subsided and grew dimmer, as the grandfather clock's pendulum swung erratically from side to side, his image flickering on and off as though the signal generating it was being cut at the source. Beware. Beware, the doctor said repeatedly. Beware of what, doctor? Of who? They both asked alarmingly. Beware of the Malacaranus. The Malacaranus. Bang, bang. The grandfather clock was chiming with ever-increasing ferocity. Its sound and volume was deafening, and with each and every bang, parts of the doctor's residence began to change and alter their appearance. The colour of the wall turned from off-white to pale blue. The carpet disappeared to expose a neatly polished marble floor, and the living room furniture was morphing from one design to another. Gone were the curtains, the reclining armchair, the bookshelf, the coffee table, and the pictures on the wall. The entire place was in flux. The doctor's private residence, along with his office, was transfiguring into an entirely new abode, to conform with the memory imprints in the minds of those who knew him and learned of his untimely demise. What is going on? Glenda yelled, attempting to overcome the clock's increasing banging. This is incredible, Osiris yelled towards her. Dr. Bearlight is not even here, and the place is phasing in and out of configuration. Look at the pendulum bob, Glenda. Are you seeing this? The pendulum bob was shining brightly, as if it was ready to blast, and the doctor's image seemed to have been sucked right into it. Osiris, you're fluxing! Glenda screamed as she rushed towards him, while holding Aurael, and as soon as their hands touched, an immense flash of light exploded out of the pendulum bob and swallowed them both right into it. Chapter 6. In what seemed like a brief moment, the couple and their son materialized in the living room of their Upper West Side apartment, along with the grandfather clock, which situated itself adjacent to the balcony. Check on the baby, Glenda, Osiris hollered at his wife as he was observing their surroundings, which appeared to be somewhat off, a likely aftermath of their erupt manifestation out of the pendulum bob. There was some golden ethereal dust fleeting out of the kitchen window, and some around the clock. But other than that, the apartment seemed as normal as could be expected. They both sank into their living room sofa, staring at the gigantic TV screen with Aurael by their side. Are you up to it? Osiris asked laughingly as he was looking fixedly at it. Are you mad? Glenda replied acerbically. I think we had enough popping in out of objects to last us a lifetime, don't you? You are absolutely right, he said as he continued laughing while carrying Aurael to their bedroom, laying the infant gently in his crib. The baby's aura was brilliant and sharp, pulsating with a steady rhythm, as though it was an extension of his heartbeat. It took several more minutes, and the child's aura waned and finally evaporated from sight. Aurael was sound asleep while they both stood over the crib, admiring their newborn son. Their bedroom phone suddenly rang as they continued gawking at him, commenting on every curvature of his face and tiny body. Who could that be this late at night? Glenda pondered loudly and somewhat impatiently. Hello? Hi, Glenda. How are you? It's Greg. I heard you just got out of the hospital. How are you feeling? How is the baby? Osiris could overhear Greg as he stepped closer toward his wife. We're fine, Greg, he yelled from across the room. Thanks so much for calling. What an unexpected surprise. Aurora and I are dying to see the little one, Greg continued, Can we stop by tomorrow?" "Yes, of course," Glenda finally replied. "Please, we'd love to see you tomorrow." The following day, the phone rang incessantly and without pause. It was as though the entire universe called to congratulate them on the birth of their son. Family and friends, colleagues from work, and long-forgotten acquaintances. Aunt Edith called from Denmark, and Osiris's uncle Jatta took a flight from Nairobi, Kenya, as soon as he learned about his nephew's birth. Even his yogi research subject, Chandradeep, called to congratulate him, and Glenda's ashram instructor, Abiki Chand, sent a gigantic bouquet of flowers. By the voluminous stream of phone calls, it seemed as if Aurail's birth resembled a worldwide event, drawing well-wishers from all over the globe. "What has he done?" Osiris asked rhetorically. "How many people did Dr. Bearlight imprint with the memory of our son's birth?" "As many as he thought would be necessary to concoct the ultimate cover-up, substantiating and validating Aurail's natural birth," Glenda replied, awestruck by the doctor's mind-altering feat. "Aren't you a bit worried Aurail is going to glow right in front of everyone?" Osiris asked, looking concerned. "Well, if that happens, we'll counter it with our own matter manipulation abilities," Glenda replied. "Here, let's give it a try." Their skin began to glow. Osiris stretched his palm forward, as though he was about to touch her, and Glenda's glow vanished immediately. "You see?" she said. "Nothing to worry about." 8 o'clock was fast approaching, and their guests started to arrive. First, of course, were Greg and Aurora, and their 3-year-old daughter Annette, carrying a huge teddy bear. Uncle Jatta was stranded in the airport, and insisted on getting to the city on his own. "Stay home," he commanded Osiris in his deep baritone voice. "I know my way around the city." Glenda's parents, who lived in LA, promised that they would stop by the following week, and Osiris's mother, Loretta, walked in about 7:30 p.m. Glenda's entire office attended the celebratory event, as was Osiris's fellow researchers. "Parapsychology? Meet exact science," he said, laughing out loud as he was introducing his colleagues to those of Glenda's. The two groups engaged in light social conversation and steered away from the potential controversy about parapsychology, which was viewed by the majority of this scientific establishment as pseudoscience and quackery, rather than exact science. But today was not a day for discourse about differentiating facts from fiction. They were all engaged in small talk, drinking, and of course admiring the newborn infant. Aurail was wide awake, and smiling at all who carried him in their arms, poking faces at him, and cooing in high-pitched voices. The child was giggling out loud, and making his own funny noises to the delight of everybody. Though the place was quite noisy, Osiris could clearly hear them knocking on the apartment door. "It must be Uncle Jatta." He turned to Glenda. "Finally!" They opened the door, and nearly fell off their feet. "Father Mulligan!" Glenda yelled with sheer delight. "Father Mulligan!" They embraced and hugged as Glenda's tears of joy streamed down her face, leaving wet trails in their course. "How long has it been, Father Mulligan?" Osiris asked as he shook hands and hugged him. "Since the day I married you, my children," he replied with a broad smile on his face. "But how did you know?" Glenda asked, drying up her eyes. "We would have called you, of course, but I hardly had the time to catch my breath yet." "Well, my dear, you keep forgetting I have a direct line to God. I know everything. Just ask your husband," he said jokingly. Father Mulligan was a Jesuit priest who served at the Church of St. Ignatius Lolia on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. He came across Osiris in 1984 while participating in a research on psychic phenomena conducted by the Rhinefield Parapsychology Center. The two were remarkable chess players and met regularly for a game of chess, along with the philosophical conversations about religion and humanity's never-ending search for God. Father Mulligan appeared to be able to levitate when praying intensely, and Osiris suggested that he might be the reincarnated soul of the Franciscan Friar Joseph of Cupertino, who was said to have been prone to miraculous levitation. The tests, however, were hardly conclusive, as Father Mulligan was never able to perform the feat under scientific observation, Regardless of this failure in obtaining indisputable proof for his ability to levitate, the friendship and bond between the two men grew stronger with each passing year. Osiris introduced Glenda to Father Mulligan a month after they met, and she, of course, ridiculed the whole idea of him being able to levitate. "That's absurd," she said to Greg. "But at least he has the decency to admit that he is not capable to manifest his alleged ability in a controlled environment." Glenda was awestruck, though, when she learned that Father Mulligan was a physicist and had a master's degree in nuclear physics. "How so, Father?" she asked him. "From nuclear physics to the priesthood. That is some journey. What happened?" "It was a natural progression for me," he said. "Unlocking the secrets of matter at the atomic level has brought me closer to God. This world couldn't just be a mere coincidence, as my colleagues contend, could it? I kept asking myself. No, absolutely not. And then it dawned on me that nuclear physics was basically a vehicle that catapulted me into priesthood." Glenda was mesmerized by Father Mulligan's personal journey and his spectacular intellect. His kindness, humility, and goodness of heart left her craving his nurturing companionship. And when Osiris and she tied the knot, Father Mulligan became the obvious choice to marry them. When he was transferred to Ireland in 1988, they both felt shocked and saddened by his move, but it was understood that he'd be back sooner rather than later. That was nearly 6 years ago. "Are you back, Father? Permanently?" Glenda asked as her eyes lit up, and while accompanying him into the living room. "Nothing is permanent, my child," he replied softly. "Nothing. But yes, I am back at St. Ignatius." Glenda was bursting with joy, as was Osiris. Father Mulligan's abrupt and unforeseen arrival was indeed the best unexpected news they could have hoped for, which made them both wonder if Dr. Bearlight might have arranged his return. "That calls for a drink, Father," Glenda giggled. "What will you be having?" "My usual gin and tonic, dear." "Yes, of course. How could I forget?" The couple introduced Father Mulligan to their guests, and not before long, it appeared as though they were all captivated by his charm and magnetic personality. The priest was a born leader, and a master of mingling and socializing. He exuded a feeling of warmth, well-being, and calm on all who surrounded him. Being a certified scientist, as well as a devout religious person, he left both Glenda's hardcore scientists and Osiris's parapsychologists awestruck by his profound knowledge of particle physics, as well as the latest news in paranormal research. "Where is the little one? Oh, I see Aurora holding him. Can I hold him and say a prayer to St. Bridget of Ireland, patron saint of infants and newborn babies?" he asked somewhat apologetically. "Of course you can, Father. We'd be honored," Aurora said as she laid the infant gently in his arms. Father Mulligan held the child close to his chest, right below his heart, closed his eyes, and began to recite a prayer. "God our Father, we pray that through the intercession of St. Bridget, you will protect this newborn child, keep him safe from harm, and help him grow in grace and be pleasing in your sight. Give him strength to keep alive his joy in your creation, through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen." And as Father Mulligan began to recite the prayer a second time, a burst of bright shimmering light whooshed out of his chest and enveloped his entire body, as he appeared to be gently lifted off the living room floor and floating in midair. His aura at the top of his head was blinding in its intensity, and his face seemed to have disappeared momentarily, till the light subsided slightly and hovered above him like an angel's halo. "Mummy, Mummy!" Annette screamed, turning to her mother. "The man is flying! The man is flying!" Aurora's wineglass came crashing down as she stared at the priest in total disbelief, and Osiris's mum dropped the silver hors d'oeuvre tray she was holding and almost fell to the floor in utter bewilderment. The others simply stood there, gaping and gawking, not quite sure what was happening. Greg took a few photos of the flying monk while looking at Osiris and saying, "Did you put him up to it? I thought he wasn't able to levitate in a controlled environment." "But this isn't a controlled environment, Greg," he countered. "He is not even aware he's suspended in the air. He's in a prayer trance. It's what I have been saying all along. These types of abilities manifest themselves suddenly and without warning." While Greg and Osiris were having their verbal exchange, Glenda attempted to bring the priest down by pointing her hands behind her back toward the living room floor and shooting bolts of condensed light, thus striving to increase the floor's gravitational force by altering its molecular structure. She also struggled to dim Father Mulligan's beaming aura by touching his hand gently, but to no avail. Father Mulligan continued to hover and glow for nearly a minute, till he finally landed softly on the living room armchair and opened his eyes. "What did I miss?" he asked as he noted the looks of discombobulation and perplexity spreading across everybody's faces.